like to call this work session over. This is a work session on Budget and Finance Committee meeting. Go around the room and down for ourselves for the record. Dick Training Assembly.
Forrest Dunbar.
Pete Peterson.
Suzanne LaVance.
Is everybody online? Amy, are you online yet? She'll call in a bit. Could we have Lance with you? And
I was just told I reserved seats. I just didn't want to.
the reserve for you, of course.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Just need you to identify yourself.
Lance Wilbur, OD Director.
Dan Moore, Treasury.
CFO.
Good. Okay, we've got the agenda in front of us.
Mr. Trainee, I'm on the phone too.
Thank you, Ms. Stavowski. I know it would take you, what, 3 hours or 4 hours to get here?
No, I think it might take like 2 days, maybe.
2 days, okay. We'll call that a complaint into the state, which obviously is responsible for a road that is not functioning. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Mr. Harris, MOA financial status.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, before I turn over to Lance and to Dan, I'll just mention a couple of things. First is, you'll recall we had the tax anticipation note that was approved by the Assembly. We went ahead, we got a credit rating for that of an SP1+, the highest rating possible. We sold that last week. We had $90 million we went out to the market for. We had $850 million of interest. And so that money arrived yesterday. Happy to say that we now have a little bit of a cushion until our tax receipts coming in. Financially, we're paying our bills on time. I should give you a little bit of a heads up that we're still, at this moment, with our SAP system, and you'll hear more about SAP later, just struggling to get the CAFR done. As I've mentioned before, it's entirely likely that, again, the state will be late with their PERS audit information, so we may, we wouldn't be able to release the CAFR without that anyway, so we may end up being fine. That's our hope. That's what I have to say about the financial status of the municipality.
Thank you, sir. Lance.
I can jump in here unless you want to hear from Dan on Treasury as it relates to finances. Your call.
However you guys want to do it.
First, that's fine.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so on for revenues, focusing on 2017, the last report we provided in December was in November, and at that point we had a fairly modest positive number projected. At this point, we're still waiting for some of the final year-end postings to occur in SAP. Even prior to SAP, we're in the time of the year where there's some final adjustments they do for the receivables and also for deferred property taxes. And some of those adjustments can be fairly large. The other thing that usually is done around this time of year is the investment earnings. That's also something yet to be finally posted. So all those three items are year-end special items that can have a fairly big swing. I would say at this point our best look at things is that we are very, very close to just being on budget. So I wouldn't say that the surplus is there as it was a few months ago. Probably the biggest single reason for that that would explain the bulk of that would be tobacco tax. And Sam's Club closed suddenly in mid-December. And as a result of that, a lot of their business was for outside Anchorage. And so those businesses that were not in Anchorage began going to the other major distributors, and that created a situation where those other major distributors had a lot of credits to report on their normal return, which then reduced what they normally would have paid us. So because of the timing of that, and it was right in December, we ended up having close to $1 million less in tobacco tax revenue. I will say that we're looking at January, because we already have those numbers, there was a big bump up. So it was one of those timing issues that existed. So that was the single largest negative hit. There's been other pluses and minuses, and I'd say overall it's probably going to be right at budget or maybe just slightly below budget is what the revenues are. So it's probably, percentage-wise, 0.2% within the budget. So it's very, very close. And that's about as much as I can report now, because we're really literally waiting for information to be finally posted in SAP.
Question, Mr. Members. Mr. Whittleton.
So, given that, are there any surprises underneath there, like one department had to use overtime, another one was very frugal and didn't spend all the money?
I I would say there's no surprises. I'm just speaking for revenues, so we're not asking to talk about expenses, but everything that we've been covering all throughout the year in 2017, it was pretty much kind of going similarly. It's just, I'd say tobacco was the big surprise, and then investment earnings. Investment earnings got hit very hard like the latter part of the year, and I don't think it really recovered or got much better as the months went on. Again, that isn't even fully posted in S&P yet. So there's been a lot of volatility in the market. There's been rate increases as of even yesterday. So that causes the value, the market value that we have to record our investments to actually come down, and eventually that will come back. It doesn't mean that those were all like realized losses or anything like that. Some of them were, but not all of them. So.
Can I follow up?
Go ahead, sir.
When we got our
I
report
remember
for last
what you
Tuesday on the municipal cash flow, so
That was
our
through
returns were quite
November,
good.
correct.
That was
just for the month of November.
So you're saying December?
September was a rough month. October was flat, and November I haven't studied November. That came from Ross Griswold's group, but I just know that for the fourth quarter it was a tough quarter for fixed income. I know that just from other investment stuff that I tracked.
Is it Alter? Forrest?
For you, Dan, or for anyone, how much fund balance, if any, are we projecting for first quarter budget revision?
I will get to that. Yeah, I'll get to that part of it.
And that's all I had to report.
Pete?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So, how did we end up with marijuana taxes collected last year compared to the projection?
Sure. That one we have a pretty good hold on because we collect information within Treasury's database, and we pretty much know the information that we'll ultimately get into S&P. That one, it looks like $1.3 million is what we project for the true final number. I think the budget was set at 3. Our pro forma projection at one point last year was 1.6 million. So now that we kind of have all the data, 1.3 million is what it looks like. For 2018, the budget, well, the proposed budget, I believe, is set at 3.5 million, and we do feel that that is definitely within reach. So it's really a question of just the industry kind of snowballing with their supply and the demand, and it's we think 3.5 is definitely a possibility for 2018.
Follow-up.
Pete?
Thank you. So in the last few months of 2017, the revenue line is still going up.
I didn't bring the graph with me, but it had grown, very, very steadily. And I know October was really quite strong. I think it was in November, December, it did actually sort of plateau a little bit. So it's not going to keep reaching the sky. It's going to really slow down or flatten out. But it was strong almost the entire year in terms of the line. So it was real strong. But that's part of what you get in that first full year. So.
Great, thank you.
Let the record reflect Mr. Croft joined us. Welcome, sir. Suzanne, did you have a question, man? Go ahead, Lance.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we'll start with an update on 2017, and I'll follow on with Dan's comments about the close of 2017 as the revenues. Maybe to start with Mr. Forrest, Mr. Dunbar's question. The answer to how much fund balance is we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because of 2 reasons. One, as Dan just mentioned, the amount of cash and those investments as they get posted into SAP, the revenue side will allow us to see if our revenue forecasts were over or under the amount that we have budgeted in 17. Likewise, all of the expenses are still yet to be posted. We're working very hard with the Controller's Office to make sure that all of the expenses in 2017 are available in 17. They're still working to close 2017. We may have a snapshot as early next week, but at this point, we might not know exactly what that number is probably until later in April. And so that then will influence how much actually unrestricted fund balance we would have available if we wanted to make any adjustments in first quarter.
Can you give even a ballpark? I think any of it will exist.
So I think on the I do not know. I think that on the expense side, based on what I do know from budget to actuals, we're going to be very close. I think our expenses are going to be very close. The departments, from the information that we have, and we still have some outstanding things. We know what those outstanding things are, but until they're loaded. You know, I have, I think the only department I know that's going to be over a little bit is going to be finance, and that's because of overtime as a result to payroll for SAP. And I think we knew that one was coming. And I think we may have some, maybe have a small adjustment inside APD, but right now, I don't have anybody else on my watch list on the expense side, based on, you know, how things were going up until, you know, until October. But until we know what they are, Mr. Dunbar, I don't know what it is right now. Of course.
So a related question, and it's literally only been 3 weeks since you started collecting it, but I'm curious, any early impressions on the fuel tax, on how that's working and how much revenue it's bringing in? And if you don't have any numbers now, when can you start to present those to us?
Yeah, okay, so the fuel tax took effect March 1st. By April 30th, that'll be when the first monthly return comes in.
Okay.
So we'll know at that point. We have not had any negative feedback or concerns from the industry. We actually had a whole series of meetings with major industry players, and we also did a very significant mail out to everyone, even, you know, beyond Anchorage, to make sure everyone knew about it and would register with us. So we have a list of registrants, and so far it seems like it's gone very, very smoothly. So we will find out if our estimate, which I think for this year is about $11.5 million, we'll see how close that first month comes in. But things are, I think they're set up very well, and it was a really easy tax to put in place because we could follow the state model very closely, and the industry already knew the state model, so we just followed that extremely closely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any other questions from the assembly? Yes, John.
So if SAP is right now people are learning it, so they might be a little clumsy and slow putting stuff in. Is it possible that some departments scattered around don't have all their expenses
Yes.
entered yet? You don't know who they are or what they are?
No, we do know. We ask the departments, we do know what they are. And so earlier in the month, what we did is we asked all departments to give OMB a list of any outstanding invoices they believe have not been captured. We received all of those, we've given those to the controller, and they're working on loading those things in, whether they're a revenue that was captured, as Dan mentioned, from a particular grant, make sure that an expense was done, was it in the right account, and when all of those things get trued up, and they're working on that list. And the list was pretty long, but I know that the controller is working diligently to narrow it down. As I mentioned, I mean, we've asked them to really focus on those outstanding issues that would affect general government fund balance. There are still some outstanding issues that could affect the equity or some of those things inside the utilities, but as it relates to, I think, the interests of the Assembly to the fund balance piece, they're diligent working on those. And so the last report I have from them is we might have some information as early as next week, but again, that's the only information I have. But we do know what the list is, and we're working on the list.
John?
So, I mean, pay for this huge program, so purchasing will be tied in,
Yep.
vendors get on, and it's all in line, and when it's received, somebody clicks it, it's received, so it's automatically posted, and then we don't have these issues next year.
No, I think there's a difference between the issues that the tracking of all of the activity in 2018, I think that is going much better than the tracking of the expenses for the last quarter of 17. And since we're trying to close at 17, is all of those expenses, they need to make sure they get into the right accounts inside 17.
But that's 17 and 18, this should be smooth.
It should be a lot
It's
smoother.
all using the full system.
Yes. Yes. The 18 expenses, you know, what people have in their 18 budget and the way that they're tracking that inside their 18 budget is going a lot smoother. It's making sure that those expenses that they had aren't being loaded. You know, the invoice, if the service was provided in 17, the invoice was actually paid in 18. The reality is that 18 should have been paid with the 17 revenue that they had, and we need to make sure that all that happened accurately. Otherwise, departments will be under budget, underfunded in 18, and so we need to make sure that they don't land there, and we need to make sure that it's accurate. So that's what's going on in 17. So our goal is to continue to work to find out how we can get 17 to a close, hopefully to a point that before we get to a final decision on the first quarter revisions for 18, If we do know what that fund balance number is and what that unrestricted fund balance, how we might be able to use that. So if I can jump to 2018, we operate under the premise that we will have a fund balance number, and what we do with that is yet to be decided. But we asked departments to give us their submissions. We received submissions. We asked those to be provided to us by last Friday, and we've received all of those. But all departments, I believe, have submitted those. We had a couple on Monday, and we worked with them. So we're now compiling that list of what the asks are. And in preparation of, if we have the ability to add some things on, what might we want to do there? So we are also on the same schedule that in a little less than 3 weeks we will introduce the first quarter revisions on April 10th, and then and we'll be working to the wire to get that together as new information comes together, and then the current schedule is the Assembly will take action on that on the 24th. So I need to work with the Assembly and Rose to schedule a work session on first quarter revisions. I'm thinking potentially either the Friday before the public meeting or the Friday before that. But so you'll be looking for that on your schedule as well. So I think those are the high points for where we are in the 2018 budget revisions at this point. So,
Any questions on the 2018 budget? Okay, thank you, Lance.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alton Mangate. Welcome to the meeting, sir. You're the Budget Advisory Commission Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got some handouts today. So what we're going to probably be taking a look at this year is a lot of the exemptions. Probably going to be making some recommendations in the future. Just to briefly take a look at those, it gives you an idea of how much property we have exempt by category, by the number of parcels, and these are for the years 2014 through 2017. So you have the basis to do comparative analysis. There's a lot of money out there, a lot of entities. So we're going to be. But this will give you an idea of how much the taxpayers are supporting. The other item that I handed out is one item, I-18, which is a form that all tax exempt entities, including 501c3 businesses, and we, as a personal individual, not speaking for the board at this time, but I think that this would be somewhere down the line. You may want to amend your reporting on property tax exemptions to require certification by the IRS that they are certified and in good standing. Number two, I've heard in the past that we don't know how your money is spent. So by taking a look at this IRS form, which you should consider as a portion of that requirement, this gives you a lot of information. And particularly if you have nonprofit entities that you do give grants to every year, it would be very, very practical to require this form so that you know where they spend their money. I know it's kind of a new approach, but I think that it gives you information that you would need to see where the money is going, where all our income is. So I think briefly why we're going to be taking a look at those exemptions, because I think there's state law, which gives the assembly or the municipality the authority, to do that. And, because at least for police, fire, and public works. So I think that's my presentation at this time, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Dunbar first and Mr. Wilton second. Mr. Dunbar?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Al, I was wondering if, and I can't remember if you did take a position or not. We've been talking about creating a stormwater utility. That is something that has been discussed and studied the past year. I'm trying to remember, have you guys taken a position on that utility yet? So one of the benefits of that utility is it's not taxes, right? So otherwise tax exempt properties have to pay their share of that utility, the way they pay for water or electricity, right? And so it's a way to, right now we do these drainage projects through these bond issues that only come from property tax holders. I'm sorry, property tax payers. But if we had a stormwater utility, then we could use more like a user fee system, and these exempt properties would pay that. So it's something that I would like if your group could look at and see if that's a conclusion that you also reach. And just in general, how you feel about the stormwater utility. I think it's something that we're going to continue to explore for the next couple of years.
Well, we'll take it, we'll have a look at it, yes. Have it on our agenda, why, we'll take a look at it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Al. Mr. Wilton, sir.
Looking at your numbers in 2016, there's a huge net in total, a lot of different types. If you jump, we went from $2.25 billion to over $6 billion.
Well, I think that, as I understand what's happening, is that the assessor's office is bringing more of these exempt properties onto the roll. That's what they're working on it, as I understand.
This went up, but this is off.
Mr. Harris, can you answer that question, Mr. Wilton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wilton, Mr. Tamani. He's exactly right. The assessor's office has been stepping up their efforts to do accurate assessments of these properties. And that's how that number has increased. They've simply upped the number of audits of these properties, and that's why the number has changed. It's not that the value changed; it's that our assessment of those, we stepped up our efforts on it.
Because I think some people are assessing, I can go through some, like Anchorage Live, I'll look around, you'll see something assessed at 0. What you're saying is, because why bother assessing it, they're not gonna be taxes anyway. Now you are assessing it just to get a grip on how much.
I believe it's our responsibility, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, this might be one of those instances where I say something and then I have to walk it back in next month. But I believe it's our responsibility to have an accurate assessment of that property value, even though it's reported as 0. Because the Anchorage Live and those other property tax rolls report what the property tax base would be.
Mr. Wilton, anything else, sir? Mr. Croft, sir.
What did you say about payment of real taxes?
Well, these state law allows the municipalities to work out arrangements for payment in lieu of taxes. The municipal code, I believe, also does that. And so the aspect would be, when we take a look at police, fire, and public works, the snow plowing and stuff, that it's something that we may want to have addressed.
State law says they will pay for those basic services even on exempt bills.
State law says that we may work out agreements for paying the little taxes.
Do you know of any other municipality that has agreements where they pay for those activities?
Well, I know the municipality has a couple of those already. One is for the joint housing at JBR. They pay in lieu of taxes for those houses.
The federal government does.
The developer, I believe, that owns those houses, that is paid through the municipality. I think it's $700,000 a year.
because that's federal. I'd love you guys to look into it. Your agenda's your own, but whether any other state properties pay anything, and whether any other municipalities have agreements with the state to do, because that's very.
We'll do that.
Yeah.
You'll do that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm the staff, so yeah.
Good. On this 990T, how often do we require them to certify, give you a copy of this, that they are in fact tax exempt? Mr. Harris?
Well, I'll defer to the assessor on that question, but as to, with respect to when the 990 is required for grants, I can tell you from my experience as the president of the Youth Symphony years ago, that we had to complete the 990, and it was oftentimes required for submitting for a grant application as sort of the financials to establish. It was a different level than a single audit, for example, but so, you know, I know that the 990 is that's the tax return that a nonprofit entity has to file, and so they'll have them.
Do we require them when they're filing for something with us to show us proof they've filed their 990?
Let me
IRS?
let me look at that and find out if that's a requirement.
Thank you. Yes, Dean?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the nonprofits are already filling out this 990T every year and sending it to the IRS.
Right.
So this wouldn't be an additional expense for them.
It should not be.
Okay, thank you.
Lance? You had your hand up, sir?
I was just going to follow up with Mr. Harris. I think, you know, if you guys are interested in this information on non-property taxes, having Bryant here to explain it as it was available to the public Budget Advisory Commission. I mean, again, it's not an increase in the exemptions. It's just an improvement on their ability to report the existing ones, and that's why, because Bryant's had some changes in his staff, some focus on his efforts, and that is why the primary reason for the numbers are there. So, but again, I think Brian or someone from the assessor will give a great presentation on this particular issue. And again, Mr. Tvani, you know, their interest in this has always kept the assessor's office on point on this one. So, may I answer questions?
Mr. Gates, sir.
Thanks. I just wanted to mention that this IRS tax exemption document, it would be just one factor, I think, and it's very persuasive. But for property tax exemption for nonprofit return, we use in Alaska law from experience with property taxation. It depends on the use of the property, not necessarily just the ownership by the nonprofit. So it could be owned by a trust, for example, but used for a nonprofit purpose. And so have an exception if it doesn't get this from the owner. So,
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Gates. Anything else from assembly members? Okay, let's get down to item 6.
Great. Thank you,
Our
Mr. Chairman.
friendly SAP.
Sure. So, as I mentioned before, we're still working on preparing the CAFR and the supporting documents that go into that. As Lance has mentioned, we're still working through some of the financial bugs with the system. Maybe calling them bugs isn't the right word. And I will mention, too, that for the we have consultants that have been helping us. We had a pot of money that had been directed to that. We've been able to stretch that out. So we have folks that will continue to help us going up through the end of June, I think, right now, to help us get the system up and running, fully functioning the way we need it to. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Falsey to talk about the topic of the scope and status of pay correction liability. Bill, if you'd like to chair, welcome to have mine.
Sure.
Mr.
It
Foley,
might be
sir.
helpful to get the lights. I'm going to do one off-topic diversion.
Please, I want
So we're now
Diversion,
seeing
sorry.
on Channel 2 that there's an emergency request for $1.8 million for DOT to fix the bridge. Traffic in Eagle River today has been epic. We knew that was going to be a problem, and APD responded to the best of its ability. I wanted to give you the update on what we did and what we're going to do.
Mr. Tabasco, you online?
I think I heard a dial tone,
Amy?
so we might have lost Amy. I did speak to Amy earlier today before I had a chance to get the update from APD, and I know Chief Dahl has been in touch with Amy since
Sorry to
then.
interrupt you.
Okay, so yesterday afternoon, we knew that the incoming southbound lanes of the Glen Highway were going to be closed. We knew that was going to be a colossal situation. So APD pulled all of the traffic unit resources it could throw at this and put them in Eagle River and asked our contractor, Shaman Traffic Signage, if we couldn't route the southbound traffic onto the northbound lanes. The contractor said yes, but not today, and the reason was apparently it is not a simple reroute because of the geography here. In order to pull the incoming traffic onto the northbound lanes, they have to be on the northbound lanes for a very long time because, you know, just after the Pizza Man Bridge, the traffic diverges and crosses the river. So apparently there's a long time where you have to be diverting, and the contractor needed some time to spool up. The good news is the contractor has suggested to us that they could do it tonight for tomorrow's commute. We have the money, we have a $200,000 state grant for traffic diversion purposes, so it will hopefully be a lot better tomorrow. It's still not going to be good because I don't yet know, and our preference would be to take the full northbound lanes and to put all of the southbound traffic onto the northbound lanes and divert all of the northbound traffic onto the side roads. It may be, and I'm waiting to hear the answer to this, to get some updated maps, that you can't fully close the northbound lanes and use them just for southbound traffic because you might have to reroute the northbound folks after the Highland exit. So it may be that the northbound lanes end up getting split 2 and 1 or even 1 and 1 with a middle closure in the middle. All of which is to say it will be better than it was today. It is still not going to be pleasant until the problem is solved, and that's probably at least a week away. Channel 2 is now reporting that DOT is trying to move some emergency money towards fixing it, but that's the current state of play. It is top mind crisis of the day. We're working it as best we can.
Amy, you back online?
I am. I'm sorry. I had to hang up to talk to the police chief again for a second.
There we go. So she's
so
getting
I'm
straight
sure
from
Mr. Falsey just gave his update on what's happening with the traffic.
Yes, he did, ma'am.
That's right. The top line summary was APD's preference yesterday was to put southbound traffic on the northbound lanes. The contractor couldn't make that happen today. We're hoping we can make that happen in some form or fashion tomorrow. We'll have more concrete information on that, but it is top of mind. It is the issue of the moment.
Oh, wonderful. And I might actually be able to add, because I've talked to Chief Dahl, and I was literally just talking to Chief McCoy a moment ago, and they said they're planning on not diverting traffic until after tonight's rush hour, and then they will be diverting inbound traffic on the outbound lanes from North Eagle River and putting them back on at the weigh scales tomorrow. So that's my information that I have. So
Right.
Hopefully that makes sense.
So I've asked APD to generate some maps that will show what all that looks like so we can start circulating that. I know our phone lines have been totally inundated from the mayor's office through APD to even people who are inappropriately calling 911. You guys are also getting slammed.
Yeah.
We're trying to get as best information out as we can. We have not pushed out onto social media yet that we are definitely putting people on the northbound traffic lanes yet, even though we believe that is going to happen just because it is not 100% within our control. If the contractor chokes again or if DOT tells us there's some snafu that we don't know about yet, that could scuttle plans a little bit, but I have pretty good confidence that that is what it will feel like tomorrow morning.
Okay, I have one other question, Mr. Falsey, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Speaking with the chief today, I recognize that last night when talking to the contractor, they just said they couldn't make it happen. And my question is, not today, not this moment, but if you can look into the future, for us, there was some confusion as to whether the municipality could even solicit or call another contractor to see if they could make it happen. Can you look into that and see if we're barred from doing that? Because to me, pretty significant impact to the, Anchorage School District today, we had multiple schools out here where they didn't even have teachers, so literally the kids were being put in the multi-purpose room because there was nobody there to accept them. And all the schools out here in Kugiak Eagle River are being let out early today, starting at 12:30 as a matter of fact, because we've had this traffic has impacted far beyond just people being late to work. And so for my perspective, if there's something in code or contract that if a contractor can't fulfill this obligation, maybe it's lack of staffing, maybe it's just engineeringly not possible, but if there's something else we can do and maybe go somewhere else, can you look into that?
Yes, I would be happy to do that, and that is right. I've also been in communication with Tom Roth at the school district. We definitely understand that it was not a good situation in the schools in Eagle River today. There were kids being sort of warehoused in multi-purpose rooms because the teachers couldn't make it in. Here in the municipality, virtually all of our payroll department has turned around and gone home today because they are all live in the valley or in Eagle River, Birchwood area. So yes, we are laser focused on this today.
Okay, and I think this is just a learning moment for future. I mean, when you have 30 to 50,000 cars coming in and you reroute them through the small community of Chugiak Eagle River and you have one lane road to turn onto the highway, clearly it's an issue.
Anything else, ma'am, before we go to other semi-emergency questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Don't forget, you're going to have that toll booth out there tomorrow. You're going to be manning it and collecting money from them.
I might be handing out coffee and cocoa. I don't know. We'll see.
Then we'll get money. Pete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this truck hit the overpass. Is the overpass not safe? Is that the reason we're
Yeah, so
I saw on the news, I saw cars driving over the overpass last night. So
Ooh, I don't think they're supposed to be doing that. I don't know if I have a picture of it in this article, but yes, the DOT has been quoted as saying that when the truck hit it, it pulverized this concrete, and so it's not structurally sound there at all, and that we're getting shards of concrete and some of the rebar is actually just falling into the roadbed. So, no.
So repairs could take a while?
Well, what they're saying now in the press is 3 to 5 days, I think, is the stabilization. I don't know if that's the permanent.
It depends on the weather, too.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to pour concrete when it's below freezing.
Anything else from the summit?
Thanks, Mr.
Questions?
Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Falls. We appreciate it.
Okay, so from one happy subject to another, we'll now pivot
Our favorite subject.
to SAP. So the Assembly at the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting wanted a better sense of what is going on in payroll. And this is going to be my attempt to give you my best sense of what has been going on in payroll and what its implications are for us going forward. I have 3 windows into what has been going on in payroll, and I will start with the first one. Incoming pay corrections. So in the old PeopleSoft world, every payroll period, there would be some number of paper pay correction forms submitted to the payroll department. And this could be, I put in leave in the system and I didn't end up taking it, or I miscoded my time, or something went awry and somehow or other I just didn't get paid correctly. This was sort of the static background level of PeopleSoft era pay correction, somewhere between 30 and high of almost 90 a month. Like I say, this is a paper form. You pull it off the website, you send it in. So this is pre-SAP. We're going to turn SAP on. And this is a subtle difference, so be sure to look carefully to see if you can pick the trend. Here's what happened after we turned on SAP. So we went from somewhere between 30 to 90 to, in the first month, the number of submitted pay corrections was 1,282. The next month is 1,000, next month is 900, it's about back to 1,000. And then in recent months, February and this month, which is not yet over, 228 and now 109 for this month. We just pushed a payroll today, so we'll see what March shakes out to be. In this first of the 3 windows, I think there are at least 3 stories that this graph is telling. The first is the obvious story, which was this was, as we have been saying, a rocky transition period. The magnitude of the pay correction, so far as we can get a grasp on it, is not high. It's not like the system was producing payroll errors of 50% of payroll, but the number of errors was 2 orders of magnitude beyond what the office was used to and staffed to really process. And some of the payroll correction forms, if you go and pull them out of the stack, they are literally like my pay was off by $1.67. So, and some of them are much bigger than that. But so story number 1 is we had a very rocky period. The second story, which I hope to be the case, and which I have some confirming information I'll show you in a minute, is I hope that the worst is now behind us. So we have hit this tsunami, but the trend line is very good. We are much closer today to the way we were back in the PeopleSoft era, so hopefully the waves that are going to crest on our shore have now already crested. The third story is, you've heard from Robert Harris many times that when we first started doing these payroll corrections, they took like 3 to 4 hours of pay correction to process. And so when payroll was hit with this wave of pay corrections, it was very clear that the priority had to be first to turn the spigot off, so to fix the system so that there was not this level of incoming pay corrections, and second, to process these in a different way so that we could move them more quickly. It turns out we do have a different way to process the pay errors, and that is a machine called SAP. And so I'm now going to pivot to the second and third windows into the what has been going on in the payroll world. When we identified that the system was systemically producing mistakes, so for instance, firefighters get a boot allowance. There was a moment where the boot allowance was not being paid correctly. We would log a defect, we would create with our consultants a production fix to correct that defect, and then we would push that defect correction into production. And then the machine is smart enough to know, if I had been programmed this way from the very beginning, here is how I would have paid people differently. And then it racks up what the overpayments are and the underpayments. And those are the next two windows, window number 2, window number 3 I have for you. So once we put all of the SAP fixes into production, the system went back and said, if I had been configured this way from the beginning, I would not have paid people the way I did. And there are about $1.5 million worth of overpayments that went out the door. The system can automatically scoop those back, but as to the overpayments, we have not let it do that. And we haven't let it do that yet because there's also a complementary slide I'm going to show you in a minute on underpayments. And we definitely did not want to be in the situation where someone said, I got shorted 2 or 3 times, I got overpaid once, you took the overpayment back, and I'm still waiting on the underpayment. The story of this graph is, I hope, complementary to the pay corrections graph, which was, again, very rocky in the beginning, but a lot better today. And it looks like from the corrections we have pushed into production and into the system, we are a lot closer to stabilized than we were certainly at the beginning. And we may be entering the period where when the machine is running correctly, we can turn around backwards and figure out how to deal with what happened over the last several months. The second thing to say about this is that this is the system's understanding of what should have happened if it was configured today the way it was configured, if it was configured originally the way it's configured today. It doesn't know anything about the pay correction requests, right? That's not an input into the SAP system. This is us changing the way the system is configured and it producing a result. These are now sitting in the queue, and we at some point will have to pivot to the employees and to the unions and say we're going to start recouping these monies, but we are definitely not doing that tomorrow, and we are not going to do that until we've cleared out the rest of the underpayment problems. We will not do it precipitously, but this does have a budgetary impact, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So the third and final window into the payroll, what has been going on, is the underpayment side. This is the same story. Once we pushed corrections into the system, it went back, looked at the beginning of time, here's how I would have paid people differently. These we have let go. So these are, we have heard the retro payments. This is where SAP, the system now says, oh, I shorted all these guys on boot allowances, so the next paycheck I send out, I'm going to have a retro payment that fixes that problem. This adds up to about $2.5 million for the 6 months we've been running. I'll say about that magnitude, that is a big number, but it is a small percentage of the overall payroll. I think the net payroll we push out every 2 weeks is like 10 million-ish. And so something like less than a 5% magnitude error is happening, even though it's it is a big number and there's a number of different pay corrections. So that's the story that I can tell about what has been going on in the payroll world for the last 6 months through the incoming pay corrections, the system identified overpayments that we haven't recouped, and the system identified underpayments that we have already fixed. Next part of the story, what is the implication? So we have multiple unions here in the municipality, AMEA, the police union, the fire union, the 2 IBEW unions, the local operating engineers 302, Public 71, plumbers and pipe fitters, and Teamsters 959. Every one of them has their own collective bargaining agreement. Every one of those collective bargaining agreements has a rule about how people get paid. and every one of them has some kind of penalty provision for when you pay people incorrectly. So this was the question that was asked at the last work session, and I will step through all of that. But first I'll say, because each union comes with a different flavor, we can also tell the 3 stories I just told with the union view. So incoming pay corrections, it has been partly a reflection of how many people we employ in all the unions, partly a reflection of how complicated folks' pay is, but the incoming pay corrections are mostly order of magnitude highest police corrections. That's this first and third bar, followed by fire, and then it winnows down. On the underpayments side, again, we have cleared a tremendous amount of fire corrections, a tremendous amount of police corrections, and then everyone else is a much smaller order of magnitude. And then overpayments is vastly a police story. And this is a story that's going to come in when we do first quarter budget revisions. I think that we're going to say, when Lance has finally gotten all the information, we've turned the crank. Police made their budget except for this. And when you add this, that they pushed out $800,000 of pay to employees that the employees were supposed to get, they are over budget by nearly $800,000. So that's going to be part of our story as we go forward. The other thing to say about this is that partly there's been a lot of discussion about why we were focusing on various different things. We were trying to solve the problem as quickly as possible by addressing the pay problems that affected the most people. So you've heard from other representatives from other folks who are in other unions, but this is partly what was helping to arrange our thinking here. So stepping into the collective bargaining agreements, I'm going to show you 9 slides, all of which have way too many words on them and which are not worth reading but are here for reference in case you want to go back. The point of these 9 slides is just to say, I'll tell you what the penalty is for each union and when it appeared. The bottom line story is these provisions have all been on the books for a very long time and they're all different. So AMEA, after the error in pay is identified by the employee and verified by the municipality after a reasonable amount of time, $60 a day. That's been on the books since 1977. Police union doesn't have the same kind of trigger. It just says if there is an error in pay, you get 4 hours of pay for every 24-hour period. That's been there since 1975. Fire has a similar lack of a real trigger. There is a trigger, but we only have a window of a week, I think, to figure it out. Fire is not paid correctly, $50 a day. This was actually added in 2015 for the first time. It was the last Sullivan CBA before he walked out the door. IBEW, if, again, we don't pay correctly, it's $50 a day. That's been there since 2014 with the penalty. The technicians IBEW is $25 a day. Local 302 has, after the error in pay is verified and confirmed by central payroll, if there's a delay, it's 8 hours of straight time pay per day. That's been there since 2002. Local 71, after the error in pay is verified and confirmed by central payroll, $75 a day. I think this is the last one. Teamsters, short window of time to do the correction, and then 8 hours of straight time pay since 2002. For the non-representative employees and for the executives, there is nothing like any of that language in Muni Code. So there is no penalty provisions associated with that. So wrapping them all up, this is what it feels like. All of the provisions are different. Some of them have triggering language, which may precipitate further conversation with those unions about whether we have even stepped into any of those penalties, because many of the submitted pay correction forms have not been yet verified by central payroll, and so arguably the clock has not started on those. Others do have a provision which suggests that maybe a clock has started. Some of them are very difficult to actually calculate because they have an individualized penalty provision, because the straight time is individualized to the person. You need to know what that person actually makes. So this is sort of the law. This is sort of the rules of the road. How does that mirror on to the facts of the submitted pay corrections? The answer right now is, I don't know. And that is not a coy answer or trying to be too cute, but a substantive answer, and I will tell you why the substantive answer is I don't know. The when we were living in this world of all of these pay corrections, remember the priority was stop the flow of incoming pay corrections by fixing the machine, then use the machine to clear as many errors as rapidly as possible, and third, then start picking up the individual pay corrections and see what's left to fix. So that was the order of priority, and that's the way we stepped through this, and that means that many of the submitted pay corrections have already been fixed or are easily fixable because they relate to overpayment. Some people actually proactively said you paid me too much, and that's a pay correction that's sitting in the payroll department waiting to be processed. Many of them have already been fixed, but we haven't done the paperwork exercise yet of saying, the 50 firefighters who submit a boot allowance pay correction, we already fixed the boot allowance in the system, and now we just need to close that loop. And so that means the $2.5 million worth of underpayments are not yet reflected in closed pay corrections. The second reason I don't yet know is the pay corrections form has, until very recently, not discriminated in an obvious way between things which are alleging an error in pay or something else. So we have a lot of pay corrections that were submitted that are not pay corrections, or at least are not alleging an error in pay. They're saying my leave approval balances were incorrect, my sick leave balances were incorrect, or I got paid correctly but it was coded wrong, it wasn't a union safety meeting, it was something else. And so those will not, we think, result in any potential liability. Use purple, I guess. The pay correction triggers have not all been triggered, so where we have been processing a whole lot of pay corrections, there are some that have not yet been verified by payroll, and there actually have been many that, as we are working through the pay correction stack, turn out to be not errors at all. In the initial days, there was a lot of employee confusion about the way rounding works in the system, and so we got a lot of pay corrections that said I was shorted 0.1 hours, and it turned out no, you actually weren't shorted 0.1 hours, and as we step through the pay corrections, there's some number which are not going to true up and will only really verify them. I mentioned that the straight time complicates calculating some sort of order of magnitude here because it has to be individually calculated, and this one's now totally unreadable. But it says some of these we have recognized were an issue that has to be corrected by pushing a defect into production, and that process sometimes has required us to hand it off to SAP corporate or to our consultants. And I think that stops the clock because it's sort of outside of our control. We have done what we could do, and some of the collective bargaining agreements have language that says if it's outside of our control, that changes the trigger. So all of that is to say, I don't yet have a good way to tell you what the paper liability might be. I may have better information for you in the near term, because the last few months we have turned the corner on processing more pay corrections than we are receiving. And the new lived experience is that it is no longer taking 3 or 4 or 5 hours to process a pay correction. We have assembled a war room. We're pulling in all the time administrators from across the entire municipality to help us process these pay corrections. And APD, for example, we brought in Vivian. She was at one point doing 40 a day, I think. So her stack has windowed down from 5 individual boxes to 1 last box. I think we are now making rapid headway through the pay corrections. And once we have all of those done, there is still going to have to be some kind of auditing exercise where we go back and say, when did your pay actually, was your pay ever actually wrong? If it was wrong, when did we actually fix it? And then we will turn then to conversations with the various unions about what the implications of those are. I think we're going to have different conversations with different unions, some of whom I think are totally willing to be incredibly reasonable here and say, if we had a pay correction for $1.67, that should not result in this huge amount of penalties. No one's looking to significantly disrupt the operations of the municipality. Others would probably be more hard-nosed, but we're not going to know until we really know. So I'm trying to give you the best information that I have. This is the latest information that we've been able to pull out of the system and out of our logs as of yesterday and Tuesday. That's where we are at, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Good questions, Bill. I'm going to start with one. I understand you reached agreement with AMEA. You're giving every AMEA employee 8 hours of non-cashable leave to a tune of I wrote it down, $28,000. Is that gonna come for the assembly for our approval, or is this something the administration's agreed to do without having to come to us, or do you need to come to us?
So there's more to that story. We have not resolved any global SAP-related AMEA issue. There was a procedural snag that happened with one of the SAP-themed AMEA grievances. The way we worked through that was by offering non-cashable leave. That is a power that's in the code for the administration to use. I don't think that requires any assembly action. I'm happy to have
Would you
more
check
of
and
a
see if it
conversation
does?
about that.
I just wanna know, are you gonna do that, or have you agreed with other unions to do the same thing?
We should not have to do
Non-cashable.
that in any other setting.
Okay, thank you, sir. Forrest?
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. I have a bunch of questions, but hopefully they're all pretty quick. Just pretty quick questions. So the first is, how many revised W-2s have we issued, and are there still any that need to be issued but haven't because of SAP?
That's got to be a Robert Harris.
Has it disrupted anyone's W-2?
I'll have to look into that. I'm not aware that we have to do a lot of revised W-2s.
Great. Good. Well, as long as it's not that's enough of an answer for me. I don't need exact numbers so long as it's not a major issue. The second is just a kind of legal question. How are these penalties adjudicated? Like, do they go to? It might be different based on the contract, but in general, do they go to an admin law judge? Do they go to an arbiter? How does that generally
An
work?
arbitrator. So all of these we would either voluntarily say, here is what you are owed, and they would say, great and wonderful, and we would be done. Or there'd be grievances filed, and we'd move through the process, and Karen wants to tell me the real answer, and she's like, when is this dope going to start talking? So I tell her the real
Yeah.
answer.
So we'll be negotiating with the unions to get those fees down, or to hopefully eliminate them altogether and not have them apply. And
Could you identify yourself for the record so our machine doesn't do visuals?
really, okay, Karen Northworth, employee relations.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So, we will go into the negotiation process and hopefully be able to do a settlement where we are able to settle the grievance with our goal is no additional compensation, or to sell it for much less than what's in the contract. So that would be our goal. If we're unable to resolve it with the unions, come to a settlement, that's when we would then go to arbitration. Hopefully we won't.
Great. One last follow-up. Mr.
Thanks,
Trainee.
sir.
So I think about these kind of penalties, and I think about the situations in which they should definitely apply, where an organization, a large organization, is sort of acting maliciously or with sort of reckless incompetence, if you will, or even negligence. But it doesn't seem like, from the story you're telling here, that's necessarily the case. And you see the trend line, and we are working very hard and have made it a priority as an organization to get these things resolved, right? But if some of these contracts are written in basically a strict liability format, then it doesn't matter that much. And so I guess my question, or rather my sort of assertion, is in future union negotiations, will we try to get some kind of reasonableness or negligence language attached to every one of these kind of penalty provisions, or are they already there?
Well, we will make every attempt to get that language modified. I mean, our goal will be to take it out. I think it's unlikely that we'll be successful getting it out, but to maybe get some of the language you're talking about in there. I just don't know how open some of them will be interested in that. Some will be reasonable and see how this process works, or how it has gone through with SAP, and we may be able to clarify some of that language and bring some of that back down to the conversation.
Anything else for us?
No, that's all. Thank you.
Pete, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if we end up having to pay these fines, do the fines go to the individual employee, or do they go to the union? Who gets the money?
It goes to the employee.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Suzanne, question, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To confirm, any penalties would be paid out of departmental budgets, correct?
That's normally how we do that. This is a unique situation because, as Bill mentioned, the cause and the magnitude of the penalty is still being revised. I mean, if it was, it depends.
Anything else, ma'am? John? Question? Eric, question? No questions, okay. Next month, we have this committee meeting. I'd expect to see this back on the wall and see it going way down. But thank you for being here, all of you guys. This meeting's over with.